Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 513 of Six Pixels of Separation, the Mirum podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Sunday, May the 8th, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
Hello, Mitch, David Meerman Scott, and I write books, I give speeches, I go to rock concerts, I love to surf, and I try my best to help businesses and individuals grow and thrive and prosper.
I feel like this is deja vu.
It is kind of, but that's a good thing. It's always great to talk with you.
We should never unveil what happens we're breaking the fourth wall, as we say, but we actually recorded this conversation back in December. And in all of the 500 plus episodes, a decade plus, I've never lost any audio. David, you're the one.
No, but you know what? I'm memorable for that reason. We will remember this. We won't remember the podcast we did 486 times ago because I've been on a couple of times, but we'll remember this one.
The day that will live in infamy, as we say in the podcasting world. So here's where I wanted to start off. I wanted to start off with rock and roll because you mentioned it a little bit in the intro. You have a massive passion for that world. You co-wrote a book on the Grateful Dead and marketing. I find in my life, as you know, I spent many years in the music industry, wrote about it, published magazines, had a record label. I find so much, like when people hear that or see sort of know me from the music industry days and they come and see me now, they're like, how did you get there? And I don't know, I feel like there's so much alignment to that industry, to marketing, that it's shocking to me that people find it shocking that I find it shocking.
Yeah, it really is so much. And I'm incredibly passionate about music and have been since my first live show, I think I was 14 or 15. And I actually, such a geek, Mitch, that I have a database with all of the live bands that I've seen. And there's a few I don't remember, but most of the ones I've seen, I'm actually opening it right now to give you the exact number. It's in an Excel spreadsheet, 632 live bands, and you've probably seen a lot more than me. But I love it. It's so much fun, and I have been learning so much about how musicians market, what they do on the stage, which I learn ideas for speaking, and how they develop personal brands. One of the bands I went to quite recently was Miley Cyrus, backed by the Flaming Lips, at a club here in Boston, the House of Blues. And it was so cool because I've watched Miley Cyrus from afar and have actually become a fan because she's gone from being a Disney star where everybody all these handlers controlled every aspect of her, to someone who's taken over her own business, her own approach to what she wants to do, her own music. And I've just watched her do it, and she's been a success at it. And it's fascinating. And she's got a gazillion followers on all of her social networks and really crushes it with Instagram. I say to people I'm a Miley Cyrus fan, they look at me like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? Are you nuts?
But you love her.
I mean, it's great. It's great. And I learn stuff from people like her because I don't feel like I'm going to learn that much from following what everybody else follows. I'm going to follow something that's a little bit different, a little bit odd, and music is that for me.
Yeah, and there's also an alignment that I think people we lose in this sort of technology world. This thing that the work that we do, or that I do in the marketing and advertising space, is very driven by what's happening in the culture. And if you ever really want to know what's happening in the culture, the direct lineage really is the music that's being produced. And I say that the music that's being produced only because it is still recent, where it's also how it's being shown and displayed. I mean, we take for granted the whole video evolution of MTV to what we're seeing now on YouTube, but the visual aspects and that sort of icon-like things that we're seeing and touching more than we did in the early days of rock and roll is part of it, right? It's the fashion, it's the culture, it's the sound, it's the zeitgeist of our times.
Oh, it absolutely is. And the other aspect, which is also in parallel, which I know that you follow really extensively as well, is how the whole business has changed. Because I think that parallel can be drawn in almost every business. You know, we went from record labels being in charge, radio stations being in charge, to now where they have less power, and it's all about how the bands market themselves. And I know you're also a fan of Bob Lefferts, but the stuff that he writes about is so interesting to me because I think it's applicable to practically any business.
Yeah.
You know, the bands that boo-hoo by the fact that their labels aren't supporting them. You can say that about any business. You know, you've got to market yourself. No one's going to do it for you.
Bob Lefsetz has said that he would come on the podcast. We
Oh
have yet to make it
gosh,
happen.
you
He's on my list.
I would love to hear you have a conversation with him. I just think he's fascinating. I love the way he writes.
Yeah, we have a lot of mutual friends. But I'm hoping, I'm fingers crossed, it'll happen soon. And then also we had a sort of a parallel shared experience recently where I was not supposed to be traveling one day, but there was crazy bad weather, and I decided to head to a speaking gig a day early. Turned out that the Who was in town, which my first exposure to the Who was later in life, later in 1982. But for them, that was sort of their final concert
Yeah,
era when they first started their slew of final concerts. And
yeah.
catch the latest show. It was absolutely great, and I guess I was tweeting out pictures and stuff, and then you'd reach out to me and said, "Is it worth? Should I go?" And you
Yeah,
went. You did
I
go.
did, I did, I did, and it was fantastic, actually. I mean, I don't, I emailed my high school buddy. I used to go to shows with all the time when we were in high school. I grew up just outside of New York City and would take the train and go to shows at the old Palladium in Madison Square Garden and whatnot. We went to a lot of epic shows there back in the late 70s. And for whatever reason, we never went to the Who. And I said, why in the world didn't we go? It was great. And I took my wife, and it was perfect because she's also a fan, but not a fan. In other words, no, we were surprised we knew almost all the songs, even though we don't own any albums. And now I regret not having seen them before. And if they do come back for their 45th, this is our last tour, I would go and do it again.
Yeah, no, it was great. And for me, again, you talk about the tie into marketing and how that world comes together. This is a band that was celebrating their 50th anniversary. The night that I saw them, it was Roger Daltrey, who's the singer, was his 72nd birthday, which
Oh,
of
cool.
course, you're with a group of people and someone says, well, how old is Pete Townsend, who's the guitar player?
Yeah.
He's 70. Unfortunately, Keith Moon, who was the drummer, he passed away. I think it was in the late 70s. And John Entwistle, the bass player, passed away actually not that long ago. So you have sort of two of the four original guys. Great band. But to me, what was amazing was one is ticket prices, which are still super crazy expensive. Two
Yeah.
was the fact that it's interesting that the people who were into this music, we'll call it back in the day, are now sort of the people who have disposable income more and more. And to see the prices on, like VIP things like, go to sound check and just the prices of
Yeah.
t-shirts and stuff, I was really sort of taken by the marketing of obviously the merchandise and just the fact that a band that's been around for 15 years is still like it was a viable thing. Like there were the arena was packed with 18 to 20,000 people. I couldn't believe it.
It was totally packed for the show I went to, and people were really into it. And you're right about the experiences. I mean, I've participated in a number of different experiences. One I recall was a couple months ago. John Anderson from Yes was teaming up with Jean-Luc Ponty, who's a fantastic violin player,
Mhm.
and played with Frank Zappa and whatnot. And so they have the Anderson Ponty band. And I went on. I wanted to go, so went on looking for tickets, and they had a VIP experience where you meet them ahead of time. You go to a sound check, so you hear a song or two in sound check. You get a T-shirt, but it was extra money. But gosh, cool, I'll do that. I'll check that out because we do have the money for that, and the bands can figure out. Well, I do that in every city, and we make an extra however many thousands of dollars, and that's worthwhile doing. How cool is that?
Yeah, experience.
And it's interesting with the Who, though. I saw, I don't know, you tweeted or whatever it was, and I was like, you told me you're going to the Who, whatever. Gosh, I should go. I wonder if they've already been to Boston. Are they coming to Boston? And I went on to Ticketmaster and was like, they're going to be here tomorrow night. I'm like, oh, cool. And so I went to buy a regular ticket. Of course, all the good ones were gone. I was up in the rafters. I didn't want to do that. I went to StubHub, and for some reason, this has never happened to me. Somebody mispriced their StubHub ticket. I got
Oh,
two. I got two really good seats for $49 each,
oh, it's
and
yeah, that's
I don't know
funny.
how that happened. I was like, "Gosh, what's going on here? Someone screwed up. They forgot to put the two in front of the 49."
That's
Because
great.
every other seat in the section and in anything remotely nearby was $250.
So it's interesting to talk about an artist like Miley Cyrus and what they're doing. And again, I'm with you, especially on a band like the Flaming Lips, for when they were, they were used to be a lot more popular. Back, I think it was more in the '90s. And then you talk about these retro bands that are doing it. I call it retro brands because they are brands too, I guess.
They are. Oh, they're certainly brands. Yeah.
It seems to me like it's a very strange world where people don't want to pay for music, but they definitely seem still game to go to shows. They definitely seem game to pay for premium experiences or collectibles. Seth Godin will call them souvenirs. I also find it fascinating to watch streaming services come in where people are actually paying now for access to this content. It's not unfortunately trickling down all the way as it should to the artists. It's weird. And then artists, as you said, have the ability to go on to things like Patreon and other platforms and build these direct relationships. You would think that it's really good times for musicians, and yet it still feels like we're feeling the brunt of watching the major labels self-destruct.
I think so, but I think that the artists who can understand and grasp this new environment and figure it out, I think are thriving. I think that they say, okay, well, how can I create an experience for people? How can I craft the right kind of merchandise? How can I repackage perhaps the content I created a decade or 2 decades ago, or even in the case of some bands like the Rolling Stones, the Grateful Dead, or whoever, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, repackage that content, and I think that can help them to achieve successes in ways that just going what had been the traditional route of do a new album, try to sell it, try to hit the charts, and then go tour on the back of that album, for at least for those vintage acts, doesn't work as well. And I think for new acts either. I think it's about that experience, getting people out so they're buying that ticket.
So let's shift gear. I could talk about music with you all day because I think we're both fans. But I want to shift gears
What's the
because
next, before you do, what's the next show you have a ticket for?
I'm not good with advance tickets.
Okay,
So
yeah.
the
You know, with
way,
what we do, it's hard. I've just had so many occasions where I had a ticket and then a speaking gig came up. It's
yeah.
like kind of annoying. So I've started to push back myself.
Yeah, and I've got also a young family, and I'm never sure. But like the stories that I'll tell, like a similar StubHub. My first StubHub experience was maybe even last summer. I'm not sure. We had the big jazz festival up here in Montreal, and Stanley Clark, legendary bass player, everyone knows him, a bass nerd.
Yeah.
And it was the day of, and I was like, let me just look. And there was one pair of tickets available on StubHub. They were third row center, and they were
Wow.
they were $15 each, 1 5.
Oh, wow.
So again,
Cool.
I
Good
don't know if
for you.
somebody mispriced it
Or they were
or
paranoid they weren't going to sell and just dropped it.
and so I bought them thinking even if I don't go and I throw them out, I'm going to buy them, which sort of speaks to
Yeah,
my
right,
my
right,
my
right.
last minute. And I love the site Polestar, and I'll typically whenever I'm traveling somewhere and I have an open night, usually I make a dinner plan. So if I'm in Boston, I call you and go, hey David, do you want to go for dinner? But
Yeah.
now what I actually do is I go onto Polestar and I see, and then I invite someone to go to a concert. So the other little thing that I've realized is that I think dinners are a great way to really learn about people and see if there's an opportunity to work together, get to know someone better. It's fantastic, but there is nothing like taking or going with somebody to a concert where you both want to go.
Yeah.
That shared experience to me trumps. So I don't have tickets like sitting here, but I definitely always look to like where I'm traveling next, and I'm like, ooh, it'd be good to
Yeah.
go see
I
that
do.
person or
I
get
do
to that,
exactly the same thing.
which I love a lot. Yeah,
I love it, love it, love
love
it.
it
But
too.
never before I speak, only the day after.
Oh, I do before. I'll go the
Oh
night
God,
before.
you're a better man than me.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'll go the night before, and we should do. We'll plan to do that together one day, which would be
I
fun.
want to. I
We'll
want to.
we'll
Well,
Instagram
also Boston and Toronto, I got some good show going on up there. It's worth for the week, worth it just to come up.
or Montreal. Remember, it's a
Yeah, or
45-minute flight.
Montreal.
That can
Yeah.
work. So the original reason we spoke is because you were launching a newsjacking course, and I guess where I want to go with it is it's funny since you launched it. Correct me if I'm wrong. We've known each other a long time. I feel like there's been a bit of heat on you about this whole newsjacking thing.
There has been some. There's been some, but you know what's interesting is it always comes from people who don't understand what newsjacking is.
So let's start there.
Newsjacking, of course, is the art and science of injecting your ideas into a breaking news story. What does that mean? When there's a news story that's happening, something's going on in the media that in some way you or your brand or your company has an expertise around, you can create a piece of real-time content. It could be a blog post, it could be a video, it could be a stream on Periscope, or even just a tweet with a hashtag. You can get perhaps the media interested in your take, and they'll quote you in the story that they're working on, or perhaps somebody who's interested in buying a product or service as a result of what's happening in the news might want to find out who you are. And it's a great technique because it's simply the idea of drafting off of what's already happening in the media. And in many cases, when that happens, the media and consumers are looking for an expert to help explain what's going on. And the reason I think that there's been some heat is because people see only the trivial nature of newsjacking because so many people have gotten the true technique wrong. And what they do is they wait for a story that breaks that has absolutely nothing to do with their company, and then they do some frivolous nonsense around it. And then people say, "Oh, well, that's David Meerman Scott's fault because he's telling people to do that," which is it's just not. That's just not true. So let me give you an example of sort of the way that it works really brilliantly. Is Trent Silver, who's a 22-year-old entrepreneur who learned these ideas from reading some of my stuff. He runs a business called Cash for Purses, and what he does is he buys people's used handbags online, fixes them up, and then sells them either on eBay or sells them to boutiques, physical stores. And his biggest problem is how he can get more handbags. So what he did was when Lindsay Lohan was having money troubles. It was all over the news. She was broke. She couldn't pay her mortgage, blah, blah, blah. He offered to buy her used handbags through a blog post. And then he sent links to that blog post to members of the media. And they loved it. They're like, oh my gosh, we're already writing about Lindsay Lohan and having money trouble. And here's another really cool angle on the story. All she has to do is sell her purses to this company and she can make some money. And so they all wrote about it. He was in like dozens and dozens of different news stories, People Magazine and the Huffington Post, the Inquisitor, all these different sites. And every single one who wrote about him then linked with a direct link to Trent's Cash for Silver site. He ended up getting 8,000 online inquiries, closed 18% of them for a $250,000 payday, all from just newsjacking one story. And that's the sort of idea of how it can work. He has a legitimate tie to the story because he runs a business called Cash for Purses. He offered to buy Lindsay Lohan's used handbags, and that was a legitimate offer because it was reported in the media that she was having money trouble. And then the media wrote about him as a result, and he got business as a result.
Okay, so maybe this is me being Canadian, but it feels a bit predatory.
I don't think it is when it's done in a way that makes sense, like this example does.
But it's like she's down and out, and it's like, I mean, there is another side of it where it seems like, like, okay, she's a celebrity, she's gone through a thing, everyone knows, but I don't know, there's a part of it that makes me feel like it feels a bit like, taking advantage of someone when they're down or knocking them when they're down or.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there might be a little bit of an aspect of that, but when you're a celebrity like that, I mean, you put yourself into the public domain and then people write stories about you. Let's look at another example and see what you think of this one. And because people often say, well, you can't do this in B2B, it's only for consumers. So this example is B2B, and it's a company called Eloqua. The CEO is named Joe Payne, or was named Joe Payne, and Joe found that his biggest competitor, a company called Market to Lead, was acquired by Oracle. And there was no news about that except for the announcement that Oracle made on their website saying they'd made the acquisition, and it was a 3-sentence announcement, nothing else. So Joe knew he had a great opportunity to talk about this. So he wrote a blog post called Oracle Joins the Party and pushed it out within 2 hours of that acquisition. Now, he's the CEO of the competitor, and he's written a blog post about about the industry, about the marketing automation industry. He's written quotable quotes and stats. He doesn't say anything at all negative about the competition. He just welcomes Oracle to the marketing automation software space. Now the media has two people to quote. The original Oracle announcement that didn't say anything, it was 3 sentences, didn't provide any details, and some great comments from the CEO of a competitor. And every single news story from Bloomberg Business Week and Fortune and Forbes and all this, every story mentioned and quoted Joe Payne, the CEO of the competitor. Then they sent a link to that blog post around to existing and potential customers that they knew that were interested in their company as well as Market to Lead, and they generated $1 million worth of new business from that one example of newsjacking. The other thing that was really cool was about 9 months later, Oracle also bought Eloqua, and it was an $850 million deal. And I figured that the difference in the valuation from what was done on that deal as a result of the extra $1 million in revenue was worth $15 million. So add those two together, I call it the $16 million blog post. But the point here is that I don't think it's predatory at all for someone who has a bit of expertise around, in this case, an acquisition announcement, posting that expertise on a blog, and then having that blog be picked up by the media, and then sharing examples of that blog post to potential customers of your company.
So what's interesting about that example is that it works in the environment, and I think it's like that's almost like the lighthouse of where you'd want to point people to newsjacking, and yet we often hear, no, we always hear about the fumbles, the fashion brand that tries to jump on some tragedy and put a sale in, or an inappropriate offer to tie into a president's birthday or something controversial. I mean, and is it that people are right that that is also newsjacking, or is it that you're looking at it and trying to create that sort of cleansed or hygienic version of it?
I think that it's all, I would consider it all newsjacking, but it's inappropriate newsjacking. And the way I look at whether it's appropriate or inappropriate is, number one, unless you have a tie to the story, you must avoid any story that has negative consequences. So if the story involves death, destruction, anything terrible like that, avoid it unless your organization has a direct tie and your newsjacking can be seen as valuable. Let me give you an example. So you mentioned this sort of, have your sale when there's a tragedy, and so many companies do that. Hurricane Sandy, when it came up the East Coast a couple of years ago, there were people who did that. American Apparel had their Hurricane Sandy sale, which was totally inappropriate. And they got slammed in social media for it. Now, people would say, David, that was newsjacking, that was bad, therefore all newsjacking is bad. Mm. But also Duracell, the battery company, had a mobile charging stations that they deployed in areas that were hard hit by Hurricane Sandy and that had their power out. And they offered for free to give away batteries and also to charge people's mobile devices, their phones and their tablets and whatnot, for free. And that was seen as very valuable newsjacking. Yes, it was a tragedy. Yes, people lost their homes and were without power, and some people even lost their lives. But Duracell was seen as doing something that was beneficial, and therefore that was seen as good, whereas the exact same story, American Apparel and others, what they were doing was seen as bad.
So I'm curious because I think you're right that it's a good story, Duracell, and I'm saying the word good because I'm not sure if it's great. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if there's a part of me that feels, again, regardless, put the brand aside, it could be an Energizer, it doesn't matter who, that still in my brain is that's a very slippery slope. I mean,
Yeah,
it's problematic. People are dying. We want the news to be focused on the news. And the, I guess where I'm going with it is a lot of some of the negative that I've seen pushed your way, or the idea of newsjacking pushed away, and they don't necessarily know it's you who's named it or whatever, has been from the journalism side, where they're like, we're not writing, we're trying to inform people, and that message is being cluttered in a world where brands are trying to jump in on it. And I wear two hats because I know the world of journalism and I'm so passionate about it, and I also know the world that I spend more of my time in, which is the advertising and marketing. And that Duracell example is one where I feel you're right on the line, and
yeah.
one toe in one direction can make it really ugly.
I think that's right. I think that if the toe had been okay, we're going to sell batteries at the
That's
place,
not
and
a toe. That's a whole body going
oh,
over
yeah,
the
put your whole body in. But I think it was in this case there were tons and tons of people who gave them positive kudos on Facebook and other social media and say thank you for helping me out. Now my iPhone is charged. So that's seen as something that's beneficial. I've actually had I'm not sure if you know I spent 6 years in a wire service, Knight Ridder. I was Asia marketing director. I actually lived in an editorial desk of a real time wire service newsroom, and I lived in the newsroom for 6 years. It's fantastic. I know tons and tons about real-time news. Have spent countless drinking sessions with reporters who work in real-time news, and while on one hand they might publicly say, "Yeah, this really sucks, this newsjacking thing. It means that that the world is crowded, like you suggest." They're also will immediately tell you on the second beer or third beer that, well, you know what, we need newsjackers. Why? Because when there's a story breaking, we're under intense pressure to get people quoted in the story. And many times it's hard to find an expert. And if I can go to Google News, or if I can go to Google and type in the keywords associated with a story and find that someone who is an expert a couple hours before wrote a blog post that I can just grab some quotes from, that makes my life easier. And so I think it's reality, and that if it's reality, why not, as a marketer, use that reality to get your company, your brand, your CEO into that media report rather than somebody else's.
So the other thing is, I mean, look, I know you've been working on this concept and talking about it for a long time. I mean, the book, was it an ebook first or a book
It
that,
was
or a blog post even?
yeah, actually it was a blog post. I've talked about it way before the
Right.
name newsjacking. I've been talking about this for 20 years, but then the name newsjacking, and it was first an ebook, was 2011, and the course, which is at newsjacking.com, came out in the very end of 2015.
So this is the part two that I'm so curious about your perspective on it, because I definitely have one, but I want to hear yours first so we can jam on it, which is, if I go back to 2011, these stories had substantive shelf lives. They'd happen in the digital sphere. They might get picked up in a social network. It would sort of get trotted around. It might get picked up by a larger like online media outlet, a Mashable or whatever, that would like trigger the attention of mass media. It might get a news story, which then would get picked up by TV. And you would see these sort of what I would call also viral stories or interesting stories that developed online have this shelf life that could literally go from like a couple days online to then picking up like a week or two, because they then get the mass media. And again, because of the sustainability of mass media, it sort of propagates a little more, sometimes even driving more traffic back to the original digital channel. If we fast forward now to 2016, I think that dynamic of the half-life of this content has been cut significantly, to the point where I sometimes feel news goes into the feed and it's almost dead the second you flick your thumb.
Hmm. Just ask Donald Trump, who's the master of understanding that. Besides rock music, Mitch, the other thing that I absolutely love to learn from is the U.S. presidential election, and I am actually losing sleep over the last couple of months because I'm so into it. I live in the Boston area, as you know, but I'm only 1 hour from the New Hampshire border. So in the very beginning of 2016, it was the run up to the New Hampshire presidential primaries. I actually drove up to New Hampshire about 10 times, and I went to events with Hillary Clinton, with Donald Trump, with John Kasich, with Marco Rubio, with Bernie Sanders, and had a chance to go to their rallies. I met them because in New Hampshire they're crawling around the states looking for hands to shake and whatnot at their rallies, and watching how they handle the media, watching how they engage in social networking, watching and understanding how they link offline and online content. And I got to say, after doing the analysis, which I've done over the past almost a year, there's no question in my mind, and I've written about this probably 6 or 8 times on my blog, that Donald Trump absolutely is the superstar of real-time communications, and he also is a master newsjacker. Anytime any of the other candidates or President Obama or somebody else says something, bang, he's out with a tweet. And then the media immediately pick up on his tweet and they report it. And it's exactly what you said. I mean, in the presidential cycle 4 years ago or 8 years ago, if there was a story in the news, it might be in the cycle for 3-4 days. Now, when a story's in the news, it's 24 hours and done. But Donald Trump understands that if he, every 24 hours, does something slightly outrageous based on newsjacking what somebody else did, he's in front of the media and gets more attention than anybody else. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is my candidate. I'm not saying that it's the right thing to do. I'm not saying I agree with his politics. But as a marketer, the man is really smart.
But like this is where I struggle. I got into this space because I really believe, and I to this day I do, that when done well, it's an amazing form of communication. It's a way to let an audience know that something that may be of interest to them or is of interest to them exists, has been improved, has changed, has something new to say, or if it's a new product to introduce, it's the challenge of finding the market. And I always said that, the simplest way that I define marketing and advertising, not marketing, advertising is a way to pay to tell somebody about information. You want that, and again, from my side, I want that information to be ethical. I
Mm-hmm.
want the product to be able to stand up well beyond what the claims are of it. And I feel like I'm often, I wouldn't say dragged in, but I mean, in this conversation, you're sort of being dragged in this idea of like, well, what's good? Is it good advertising, or are we rubbernecking here a little bit? Because it's being so outlandish and so crazy, and we're humans, flashy objects. We're going to stop and stare and take a look. And there is this rubbernecking, and the rubbernecking is only compounded because you have the ability to, I used to say like something, but now you have more emoticons to play with thanks to Facebook, and comment and share and ask your network what they think, and because of that, I sort of recoil a little bit where it's these people are not the quote unquote professionals who understand how the messages are and how they're transmitted, what media does, et cetera, et cetera. And I struggle with it a lot because I hear what you're saying, and you can go, he's a masterful marketer, and but it's rubbernecking marketing, and I don't necessarily want to prescribe to it.
It's interesting, Mitch, if you go back to the first part of our conversation and then listen in on this part of this conversation. I mean, the way I see it is you've got people in the music business who have been in the music business for a really long time who say, gosh, I wish I could be back in the day, and I put out the records and I was in charge and the radio played it and everybody knew the rules and it was hierarchical and the bands, they got in line like they should and everything was reasonably predictable. And then I look at, what you just said, and I kind of think in my mind that, okay, I wish we were back in the day when the advertisers controlled the message and we could say what we wanted and we get the brands in
No,
line. And
I'm not. No, I'm not saying that. But go on.
and I believe that we are in the biggest communications revolution in human history. I truly believe that. I think it's bigger than the revolution of 570 years ago that happened as a result of the invention of the printing press. 570 years ago, the printing press was invented, and because people could all of a sudden read books that were much more common, they were encouraged to learn how to read, and as a result of that, the humanity came out of the Dark Ages and it ushered in the Renaissance. I believe we are in a more important communications revolution right now than then because practically every human on the planet owns a mobile device, and that mobile device connects them through the internet to every other person on the planet. And it means that there are lots and lots and lots of people out there who can create content and do create content. And much of that content has become real time. If my daughter's friend changes their status on Facebook to in a relationship, all of her friends know that fact within seconds. If someone changes on LinkedIn the status that says now that they've got a new job, everybody knows that instantly. If Donald Trump tweets, it means everyone knows that instantly. And that's the world we're living in. And I believe that there's a tremendous opportunity for brands to live that online world, to live that real-time world. And yes, there are bad actors. There always are. When email marketing came along, spam artists were very quick to follow. When I invented this concept of newsjacking and wrote about it, there are lots and lots and lots of people who are using an ethical way, but there's others that are not. When with banner ads, when those first popped up, at first it was like informational, and then it became awful, and people were trying to block them. That's just reality, and I'm just trying to figure out how can we, you, me, and everyone else in this world, advise clients how to navigate it so that they can grow their business in this new world, but then maybe not get in trouble with some of the negative aspects that are out there that you have clearly articulated.
So now I want to jump to a sort of other aspect of it, which is there's a moment in time and there's a capitalization on that moment in time, and the moment in time creates a reaction. The reaction, people buy the customer's product, they're made more aware of it. I mean, I call them transactions. Transactions,
Mm-hmm.
You watch the video, capture an email address,
Yep.
they're all transactions. Some are bigger, some are smaller. The thing is, when you look at it optically, and if I were to put it in front of a client, so now I'm wearing the agency guy hat, I sometimes think about, is this a stunt? And if it's a stunt, is it sort of a period? It's a stunt, we did it moment in time, done? Or is there something here about getting beyond the stunt, if you know what I mean? And I say that because this idea of stunt advertising is also something that a lot of people are somewhat fatiguing on because everybody's trying to do it.
Yeah. I think it can live on. I mean, I think, I'm a big fan of examples and what we can learn from examples.
No, we want stories because I think people are listening to this going like, more stories. Give me examples of those. Yeah.
Please. So Downton Abbey, the TV show, had one of their episodes about eclampsia, which is a disease. And the folks at a hospital group called Multicare Health the marketing people were watching this episode of Downton Abbey, and and eclampsia was part of the storyline. They said, "Well, shoot, let's write about eclampsia," which they did that night on their blog. They interviewed a doctor who was part of the hospital group, a Q&A about eclampsia, put that on their blog, and then created a link from their Facebook and from Twitter and a few other places on social to that blog post, and it basically said, "Did you see Downton Abbey? Do you have any questions about eclampsia? Here's a Q&A we did with our doctor." And at the end of the Q&A, there was a link to a place where people could make an appointment with a doctor if they happen to be located in the area where Multicare Health has its hospitals. And what they told me was that they had thousands of people who looked at the Q&A, and about 30 people then clicked through to do the reservation thing to make an appointment. But they said that that's the sort of thing that they look for, because there's people who might not be feeling well and they don't really know why, and maybe this is the reason, it's in the news. People are talking about it. It's the proverbial discussion around the water cooler the next day, and it's an opportunity that presents an opportunity to talk about something that perhaps hadn't been talked about in that way before. And so, I mean, there's also any kind of industry, any kind of product or company, these opportunities pop up, but they're fleeting. And that storyline no longer is there the next day, and that's when people are interested, is when it happens.
And even if they're doing it, though, and this is where, again, it's that double-edged sword where the perception could be where, well, it's exploitational a little bit, right? And if it's done in a way that creates awareness to something bad or something that's happened to people, we say, I think some people go, great, but then I still believe that there's probably another side that goes, it seems like they're still, it's like they are being, it's too much of that almost.
Well, I mean, it's playing off the news. There's something has become newsworthy, and right then is the opportunity where someone who is an expert to jump in. And who is an expert about a disease? A doctor. And why not allow the doctor to do a Q&A about the disease that was made known as a result of this particular storyline in a very popular television program? I think it's fine. Yeah. But I do agree with you that there is a slippery slope to where it's not fine. But I think in this case it is fine.
So it's the more you talk, and we've known each other for so many years, that I guess in my brain I'm like, the problem here is that it's used, it's abused, and and sometimes it's just done not to be abusive, but it's actually just a screw up. And is the problem that I'm feeling, or the resistance that I'm feeling to it, that when it's a screw up, it screws it up for everyone, even the good ones, and then it's always seen as like, the one eyebrow's being raised, like, yeah, of course you're doing it for good type of thing, right?
I think that's true of all marketing. I mean, just look at email, right? Email marketing at the very beginning was like, oh wow, it's magic and it's free and we can get all this stuff, and then the spammers came along, and now like any brand who does email marketing, there's half an eyebrow raised. It's suspect. So yeah, there's certainly some truth to what you've just said, but I still think that it is a technique that works. It's a technique that here's another aspect we haven't talked about. Marketers have fun with newsjacking. It's like, ask someone, would you like to create a brochure? And everyone's like, oh God, create a brochure. No way. How about, would you like to create next week's email marketing newsletter? No, God, that would be so boring. How would you like to watch?
Let's optimize some search terms.
Yeah, let's optimize some search terms after lunch. How much fun was that going to be? But newsjacking can be really interesting because you're using a different part of your brain. You're being aware of what's going on. You have to rush when there's an opportunity that presents itself. And I've had many people say to me that this is really fun. It's fun to be a marketer, to do this, David. Thank you for sharing these ideas.
So where do you sit when it's a brand that has, like, I love when I go into Ad Week or Ad Age and you see these brands where it's like, and I'm making it up, but like Nestle, social media real-time war room prepared for Super Bowl, like where it's like they've got like all hands on deck, and it's like, do you look at that and go like, that's what that is?
That's the curse of the Oreo tweet.
I know you love the Oreo tweet.
I hate the Oreo tweet. The Oreo tweet.
So first of all, explain the tweet first, and then let's go to the story.
The Oreo tweet is the most famous example of newsjacking, and it happened, I think it was 3 Super Bowls ago, where the power went out, and then Oreo had a war room in place, and within moments they put out an image of an Oreo cookie in a black background, and it says you can still dunk in the dark. And it was great. It was cool. It was fun, but it got really, really famous because everyone talked about it. The blogs talked about it. All the magazines talked about it, and the people in the conferences talked about it. And then now,
wait, before you go on, but also it was very much seen as the line in the sand that was going to introduce real-time marketing to the world. Like it was bigger than just the creative awards and talk. It was seen as like this line in the sand as well. Go on.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. And so I have a love-hate relationship actually to the
Mm.
Oreo tweet because it came out almost the same time that my book Real-Time Marketing and PR and the Newsjacking books came out. So it was good timing, but here's the problem, and it's a big problem. The problem is that people now believe, if you were to ask 100 marketers, 95 of them believe that newsjacking and real-time marketing is only about tying your brand to a known event.
Mm.
Okay, you've got the Oscars, you've got the Super Bowl, you've got the Grammys, you've got whatever it is, a known event. And that is absolutely the wrong time to do this because everyone else is doing it. I absolutely believe that it is a much bigger opportunity when you take advantage of serendipity, the happy accident of a story that nobody saw coming. There's going to be thousands of marketers watching the Grammys or the Super Bowl waiting to pounce with their war rooms. Are they going to be successful? Almost none of them will be. They're mostly just wasting their time and money. But if they're always aware in the back of their mind for the serendipity of that story that nobody ever saw coming, your biggest competitor being acquired, the television show mentioning a disease that your doctors have expertise in, the idea that a celebrity who is known for purses has money trouble and you run a business where you buy people's purses. This is the happy accident that nobody ever sees coming. And this is the opportunity that nobody else is going to jump on and you can jump on. And you're the only person out there with a piece of content around this breaking news. So I love and hate that Oreo tweet. And I do absolutely strongly believe that the best opportunities of injecting your ideas in real time come around this happy accident. So what I do is I'm almost obsessive about this. About 6 or 8 times a day, I go to Google News. No personalization, so I'm not looking for any stories of any types, but I just scan the news. It takes about 2 minutes each time. I have it on my iPhone. I also have it on my computer, Google News. And I just look, what's going on? What are the stories of the day? And is there something interesting that I might be able to write a blog post about? And that's sort of the idea, looking for that serendipity rather than getting your war room ready when everyone else's war room is going to be doing it too.
And I think there are extensions of the concept as you've just defined it that have been hugely successful. I mean, for example, had the Grateful Dead been celebrating, maybe they did, like their 50th anniversary, and your book was launched in conjunction with that. I think you did something with the Marketing to the Moon book, though, didn't you, as well? That was sort of time sensitive to that?
I try my best to do those sorts
To at
of
least
things.
line it up. And again, we do that as people all the time. And I think,
Yeah, well, and so Marketing the Moon, right, came out a couple of years ago, but I've sold the film rights to Marketing the Moon. Robert Stone is working on the film now, and major movie, full feature length. He's got, I think, a $3.5 million budget at this point, and we are targeting. And I'm signed on as a producer. We're going to target that book. That movie for the summer of 2019 because it's the 50th anniversary of the landing of Apollo 11, the first lunar landing. And the film is actually is scheduled to be done in 2018, about 2 years from now. But we would maybe put it into a couple, and he's had his last 4 or 5 films have premiered at Sundance, so probably premiere at Sundance. But then the theatrical release will happen right around the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. Now, and that's newsjacking. Absolutely, that's newsjacking. Is that exploitative? No,
no.
it's something that makes total sense.
Yeah, and I think that that's the big thing. And you tapped into it. I think we should end on this idea that it's easy to see the worst examples, bad examples, even people where their hearts were in the right place and it was just executed and not thought through in a way where the public accepted it. But if you can take the theology of what you're saying is now called that you've dubbed newsjacking, which I think is great in its own, and not add on the ethics, but the ethics are actually in it. It's the spirit of it, is to do it in a way that fits, makes sense, has that. I think it alleviates a lot of the pressure. Just the combustion on the other side is sometimes so loud we can't see that forest from the trees almost.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that a company that operates with ethical principles, a company that understands the potential danger of social media as well as obviously the benefits, put on their thinking cap and wait 5 minutes before they push the button on that newsjacking. I think those companies, for the most part, end up doing just fine. And the ones who are exploitative anyway, that are spam artists, that are doing creepy things on the web, those are the ones who probably won't be ethical and will do something around newsjacking that won't work. And that's just, I think that's human nature. But the vast majority of marketers who are out there wanting to do the right thing, just giving some thought to it and waiting and pausing and saying, how might this be perceived? Should we push the button or not? And then go ahead and push that button.
I think the wonderful thing about it too, and you sort of alluded to it, is that when you can do it with that subtlety, and it almost doesn't feel like you're doing it, but just that it's a part of the larger narrative, that's probably where the win is. And if you're trying to bang the drum sometimes too hard, that's what causes the backlash.
I think so. I think so. And then something we haven't touched on is almost every time this won't work. You're not going to get $250,000 of new business. You're not going to get 30 new patients coming into your hospital. Nothing's going to happen. I look at it very much like the same way that a venture capitalist funds companies. What does a VC do? They fund 20 or 30 or 40 companies, fully expecting that the vast majority of them will go bankrupt, and they hope that 3 or 4 might have a success, and maybe one will go public in the stock market, which more than compensates for all the other investments. I believe the same thing is true about this form of marketing, this type of newsjacking. Is if you write 20 or 30 blog posts, all of them drafting off of a piece of news, most of them will fall flat. Now, that's not a bad thing. You've still got a blog post. You still have a piece of content. You still have something the search engines link to. But maybe only 1 out of 20 or 1 out of 30, you'll get quoted in the press and you'll get a bunch of new clients and all the wonderful things that will happen, like I've described with these examples. You're not going to have those examples be a success every time. It is impossible.
Yeah, and I think also in the case of this idea of newsjacking, the one that works might actually be the one that surprises you the most.
I think there's no doubt about that. It's like, where did that come from? And why didn't this one that I thought for sure was going to happen, why did that one just fall flat?
Excellent. David, thank you so much for your time. Let people know 2 things. One, where they can best connect to your work. And again, you're talking a lot about this now because you've created this